I still remember the evening I didn't attend the memorial for the first time in my life. I was anxious. Scared even. I had decided it wasn't the truth, but the fear lingered. What if they're right? That question kept me up many nights. If you are a Jehovah's Witness that is questioning their beliefs, or if you have recently left, it's completely normal to be uneasy or even frightened. We've been subjected to images of Armageddon and the destruction of worldly people all our lives. The fear is deeply ingrained in our psyche. And to miss the memorial? The most important event of the year for Jehovah's Witnesses. That was a big step for me. I half expected demons to infiltrate my home that night. Today, I am no longer afraid of dying at some Armageddon-like event, as taught by Jehovah's Witnesses. Yes, I've made peace that I will die someday, but it won't be because of anything the organization teaches. What helped me? Research. So much research. I know more about the organization today, all the doctrines, its history and inner workings, after having left, than I ever did when I was in. I was an auxiliary pioneer, so I was well versed in the Bible, and still the knowledge I have now easily surpasses what I knew then. The more I researched, the less afraid I became. Have you ever watched a scary movie, but then watched the behind the scenes? Watched how the special effects were created, completely deconstructed scenes piece by piece? That fear completely melts away. It was the same way with Jehovah's Witnesses. I saw how they used fear, obligation, and guilt to keep their members in line. This video will discuss fear specifically. The July 11th daily text of this year read, "Today we have more reason than ever to focus on the future. World events clearly show that we are in the final part of the last days of this system of things." The final part of the last days, not just the last days. I can understand how seeing something like that can cause a little dread down deep in the pit of your stomach. That is, until you understand how long they've been saying that. Let's go back nearly 8 years to the January 15, 2015 Watchtower. Paragraph 2 says, "That disastrous example was recorded for a warning to us upon whom the ends of the systems of things have come. Now in the final part of the last days, God's servants are on the threshold of a righteous new world. Sadly though, some of Jehovah's worshippers have let down their guard. They have been ensnared by immorality and have reaped the bitter consequences of immoral conduct. Such ones run the risk of losing out on eternal blessings." In 1996 they wrote, "During this final part of the last days, it is only to be expected that the arch-deceiver, Satan the devil, would launch an avalanche of lies in an effort to undermine confidence in the Bible's truthfulness." So we're supposedly in the final part of the last days, some 25 years ago. How about 1987? Long before I was even born. Paragraph 7 says, "We are now very deep into the final part of these last days." 1985? What is taking place on the world scene today is clear evidence that this system of things is indeed in the final part of the last days, foretold at 2 Timothy chapter 3. Soon Jehovah will crush the system out of existence and immobilize its head, Satan the devil. This was nearly 40 years ago, and they claim they had clear evidence that the end would be here soon. The next few quotes are from the early 70s and late 60s that were leading up to the whole 1975 fiasco, where they have recently tried rewriting what happened. The May 1974 Kingdom Ministry dispels the organization's assertion that it was only a few running ahead of Jehovah's chariot that thought the end was coming in 1975. Yes, the end of this system is so very near. Is that not reason to increase our activity? By carefully and prayerfully examining our own circumstances, we also may find that we can spend more time and energy in preaching during this final period before the present system ends. Reports are heard of brothers selling their homes and property and planning to finish out the rest of their days in this old system in the pioneer service. Certainly this is a fine way to spend the short time remaining before the wicked world's end. They were actually commending brothers that were selling their homes and preaching during the final days of this old system. By the way, you can also find this Kingdom Ministry on JW.org if you want to see it for yourself. The December 1972 Kingdom Ministry says, "All of us should ask ourselves, does the way I use my time show that I firmly believe that we are living in the final part of the last days, and that every reasonable effort should be made to reach honest-hearted ones before it is too late?" The May 22, 1969 Awake contains one of my favorite quotes. Check out my video specifically on this one. Link is in the description below. It says in part, if you are a young person, you also need to face the fact that you will never grow old in this present system of things. Why not? Because all the evidence and fulfillment of Bible prophecy indicates that this corrupt system is due to end in a few years. The October 8, 1968 Awake, in an article entitled, How Do We Know We Are in the Last Days?, under the subheading, What Will the 1970s Bring?, it begins, the fact that 54 years of the period called the last days have already gone by is highly significant. It means that only a few years, at most, remain before the corrupt system of things dominating the earth is destroyed by God. The next page says, how fitting it would be for God, following this pattern, to end man's misery after 6,000 years of human rule, and follow it with his glorious kingdom rule for 1,000 years. The end of 6,000 years by their calculation happens to be 1975, as the chart on the next page will show. But before that, they try to backtrack a bit. Does this mean that the above evidence positively points to 1975 as the time for the complete end of this system of things? Since the Bible does not specifically state this, no man can say. However, of this we can be sure. The 1970s will certainly see the most critical times mankind has yet known. The deterioration in human relations within families, communities, cities, and nations, and between nations will worsen, not improve. If the 1970s should see intervention by Jehovah God to bring an end to a corrupt world drifting towards ultimate disintegration, that should surely not surprise us. Remember, though, that in the opening paragraph they state conclusively only a few years at most were left. Then, throughout the rest of this article, they continue to more than strongly suggest the end will happen in 1975. On the next page, they show how, by their calculations, the end of 6,000 years of human history lands on 1975. And then they quote experts that state that 1975 will face unprecedented disasters involving famine, anarchy, dictatorships, runaway inflation, and more. Further back to March 15, 1967, in an article entitled, The Last Days, What They Mean to You. But when will this occur? Are we now living in the last days of this worldly system of things? Yes, we are. All the physical evidence and fulfillment of Bible prophecies points to that conclusion. Just as cities, nations, and even empires have in the past experienced their last days, so we have now reached the time when all nations and kingdoms are, at the same time, in their last days. True, it may seem unbelievable, but it is a fact. The evidence is conclusive. Another article from the same year entitled, How We Know We Live in the Last Days. When the many factors are put together, we find that our generation, our day, is the one that is identified in the Bible as the last days. In fact, in this year 1967, we are actually living in the final part of that time. This can be compared to not just the last day of a week, but rather the last part of that last day. Even back in 1967, they claimed it was the final part of the last days. The next page of the same article contains this tidbit. There is no escaping it. All the lines of the fingerprint are there to show conclusively that we have been in the last days since 1914. Over 52 years now. If only they knew 52 years was just the start. 1962 Watchtower. We are living in the final part of the days, believe it or not. We see undergoing fulfillment, an ancient prediction that has not escaped the notice of even the World Organization, the United Nations. Tourists visiting the United Nations headquarters on the west bank of the East River in New York State read the said prediction engraved on one of the marble walls. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. As this quotation is left without a reference to its source, few tourists realize that it is quoted from the prophecy of Isaiah in the Holy Bible. In actuality, the statue was gifted by the USSR, and there is no secret that it was a passage from Isaiah. There are many more articles that stated we're in the last days, but let's jump further back to the 1800s. This one from August 1883. That's right, 1883. These terms are all of similar import and were true then. Indeed, that work of Jesus and his disciples was the beginning of the end. It was the first part of the period embraced in the word now, and we are in the last part of the same period. We understand that we are in the last part of the period embraced in the word now, in the text. And finally, this is from the very first ever Zion's Watchtower, July 1879, where it says, "This is the first number of the first volume of Zion's Watchtower, and it may not be amiss to state the object of its publication, that we are living in the last days, the day of the Lord, the end of the gospel age, and consequently in the dawn of the new age, are facts not only discernible by the close student of the word, led by the Spirit, but the outward signs, recognizable by the world, bear the same testimony. They have been saying we're in the last days for over 140 years. That was before my parents were born, before my grandparents were born, before my great-grandparents were born, and even before my great-great-grandparents were born." Here's another tactic they're using. You've probably heard of the huge project in Ramapo that will take years to build out. Well, the organization realized that some members started cluing in, why build something that will take years if the end is so close? This is what they came up with at the October 2021 annual meeting, which was featured in the February 2022 broadcasting. Governing body member Anthony Morris.
During the annual meeting of 2019, the Ramapo project was announced. And if I remember right, it was stated that the project would be complete in a few years. With recent Watchtower articles telling us that we are in the last of the last days, beautiful expression, but words are powerful. It seemed a little disappointing that this may push Armageddon off a few years. We are also looking beyond the last days. You're getting that message. Let me expound on that thought. Looking beyond the last days. And this is a quote from the Proclaimer's book, and I treasured it when the book came out, and a lot of work went into that publication. But there, referring to God's people, it stated, there's a lot of international construction going on at the time, too, if you were in the truth then. Quoting it now, "With the help of Jehovah's Spirit, they, God's people, want to give the greatest witness possible during the time that remains before Armageddon. They are convinced that God's new world is very close at hand, and they have faith that they will survive as an organized people into the new world under the rule of God's messianic kingdom." Now, please note the rest of this quote. "It is also their hope that perhaps, keyword, many of the fine facilities that they have built and dedicated to Jehovah will continue to be used after Armageddon as centers from which knowledge of the only true God can be diffused until it truly fills the earth," end quote. Beautiful thought. Right there. Still valid. So, in harmony with what the faithful slave said then, the faithful slave now says many of the projects that are being worked on now, like Ramapo and the Good News According to Jesus video series, may, or perhaps, will carry over into the new world to assist the great crowd with the work ahead, and perhaps including resurrected ones. That's comforting. That's just, you have to let that sink in.
First, did you notice those weasel words he used? Check out my video on them. Link is in the description below. But let's focus on what he quoted from the Proclaimer's book in the clip. It's from the end of chapter 20. On the surface, it almost sounds plausible in JW terms, right? Perhaps they'll use it in the new system. Well, that's what they said to the volunteers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as stated in this same book. And the sad part? Some of those projects have already been flipped and sold off. Here's an example, besides the obvious of their headquarters in Brooklyn being sold. Page 336 says, To house personnel, it has been necessary to build or purchase and renovate numerous buildings, both large and small. Further major expansion in Brooklyn was announced in August 1990 and in January 1991. Even while north of New York City, construction begun in 1989 was continuing on the extensive Watchtower Educational Center, designed to accommodate 1,200 persons, including residents, staff, and students. One of these projects was 90 Sands that the Jehovah's Witnesses built in 1993. It was later sold in 2017 and was recently converted into affordable housing. According to news articles, the Witnesses sold for $135 million in 2017, and then in 2018 the same developer sold it for $170 million, $35 million more in just 1 year. Where was Jehovah's Spirit in this real estate transaction? So Morris's words ring hollow and empty. It isn't comforting to know that projects that witnesses have worked on over the decades are simply being flipped and sold. It certainly doesn't prove that the end is close at all. And sadly, they'll continue to do it for years into the future too. They'll be flipping properties they built today while claiming the end is near, just like they did then. The Proclaimer's book came out in 1993, by the way, so it's embarrassing that he's quoting from a book that's almost 30 years old as proof that the end is close. Let's watch some more clips about how we're in the last days.
Millions have been made disciples during these last years of the last days.
As we descend deeper into the last days, people will become more desperate and violence will only escalate.
Good health, safety, overall well-being, these are becoming harder to find as we move further into what the Bible refers to as the last days.
The destruction of this current system of things is very close. Prophecies in the Bible give us no doubt we are living in the last days.
In fact, we handled twice as many disasters in the 2020 service year, in the middle of the pandemic, than we did in 2018. On a daily basis, we saw clear evidence that we are living in the last days.
The pandemic has been just one of many tests we'll face in the last days.
Well, it's evident your donations to the worldwide work, by whatever means, help provide this needed support. What can we expect for the 2022 service year? We expect the number and the intensity of disasters to increase as we move deeper into the final part of these last days.
So the events unfolding around us are making clearer than ever that we're living in the final part of the last days, undoubtedly the final part of the final part of the last days, shortly before the last day of the last days.
Keep on the watch. That's what Jesus told his disciples after describing the events of the last days. How long have you been keeping on the watch? We are certainly experiencing critical times hard to deal with. These are the conditions we've been preaching about for years. The Watchtower of June 15, 2012, pointed out clear evidence of the iron and clay when it said, opposing ideologies and close election results that do not end up in a clear majority have weakened the power base of even popular leaders so that they have no clear mandate to implement their policies. Would you agree that this is more evident now than 8 years ago when this was published? Some who were once associated with Jehovah's organization are also recognizing the fulfillment of Bible prophecy and have been motivated to come back. If you are inactive or disfellowshipped, we encourage you to speak to the elders in your local congregation.
And this is especially true when thinking about where we are in the stream of time, in the final part of the final part of the last days.
Well, of course, we know that Satan rules this world. And living in this last days that we live in bring us anxiety, sometimes even fear.
They also prey on people's fears using current events. For example, this past summer, this article on inflation was on their homepage. Well, guess what? In the 1970s and 80s, inflation was a hot topic too, and they printed articles about it then as well. It wasn't proof of the last days at all. Don't be afraid when they use current events like elections, natural disasters, terrorism, crime, or threats of nuclear war, because those articles are recycled from decades ago. They try to capitalize on every tragedy that befalls mankind and spin it as proof that they are right. They have been doing this since their inception over 140 years ago. There will always be believers no matter how much proof you show them to the contrary. One by one, the current governing body members will pass away, and they'll appoint someone else to fill the spot, as they have been doing for decades now. They'll have further adjustments and new light to try to explain why they were wrong again, and on it goes. The more you research the organization, the easier it is to spot their tactics. Fear will eventually give way to anger or resentment for all the years you've wasted in the organization, but you need to find your own purpose in life. That can take some time. We've been force-fed what to believe in and what to do our entire lives in this religion, so it can be intimidating when you need to rediscover yourself, and it will take some time. But I know you can do it. Research this religion. Understand why they aren't the truth. One topic you can research is the date Jerusalem was destroyed. They say 607 BCE. Everyone else is 586/587 BCE. If they have 607 wrong, that destroys their entire 1914 and 1919 doctrine. Or look up what they originally said would happen in 1914. Or look up how many times they've changed the generation teaching and when they changed it. Or how they were an NGO with the United Nations. Or watch the Australian Royal Commission on Child Sex Abuse and the testimony of governing body member Jeffrey Jackson. Those are just a few examples. There is so much you can research. It isn't just one thing that proves they are not the one true religion. Once you've proven to yourself that they don't have the truth, you have to find a purpose and direction in your life that brings you happiness. It's scary and exciting all at once, but I know you can do it, and I know you can be happy. And remember, you are not alone. Thank you for watching my video. Please like and subscribe. Thank you to Theo Warfare, and to the 5 anonymous supporters who bought me a coffee over the past month. I really appreciate the support. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.